Triplets denied entry to military base. Then their father called, and SEALs took over the checkpoint. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. It was a day that was supposed to be a celebration, a rare glimpse into a hidden world that was as much a part of their family's DNA as their own identical faces. For Caleb, Josh, and Noah Harris, turning 18 felt like crossing a dozen finish lines at once, but this was the real prize. Their father, a man they loved but knew mostly through carefully chosen words and long absences, was being honored. Captain David Harris was a name spoken with a kind of hushed reverence in certain circles the Triplets were now a part of. He was a Navy SEAL, a commander, a ghost who moved through the world's shadows to keep the lights on back home. And today, for the first time, his sons were invited to see a sliver of that world. The invitation to his commendation ceremony at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was more than a piece of cardstock. It was a key. It was an acknowledgement that they were old enough, finally, to understand. As Caleb guided their modest sedan, a 10-year-old but immaculately kept hand-me-down, toward the formidable entrance of the base, the air inside the car was thick with a mixture of nervous excitement and filial pride. Josh, in the passenger seat, meticulously folded the map for the 10th time, his analytical mind trying to impose order on the unknown. In the back, Noah bounced his knee, a bundle of kinetic energy barely contained by the seatbelt. They looked so alike it was often unnerving to strangers. The same dark hair, the same strong jawline inherited from their father, the same intelligent, deep-set eyes. But their mother could tell them apart in the dark, and they knew their own subtle tells. Caleb was the anchor, the calm spokesman. Josh was the observer, the one who saw details others missed. And Noah was the fire, passionate and quick to react, a trait he was constantly working to temper. The base rose from the California coastline like a fortress. High fences topped with razor wire, stoic concrete barriers, and signs bearing stark, unambiguous warnings made it clear that this was not a place one simply wandered into. It was sovereign territory, a domain of discipline and purpose. As they approached the initial checkpoint, a young, fresh-faced Marine offered a professional smile. He checked Caleb's license against the visitor list on his tablet. "Harris, 3+1 vehicle," he asked, his voice polite. "Yes, sir," Caleb replied, his voice a little tight. "For Captain Harris's ceremony." The Marine's smile widened slightly. "The CO. Big day for him. Congratulations to your family." He then gave them directions. "This is the south gate, mostly for personnel. You'll need to use the main commercial gate about a half-mile down. They'll have your vehicle pass and visitor badges waiting. Just stay in the right lane." The brief, respectful interaction settled their nerves. This was how it was supposed to be. Professional, orderly, a world of mutual respect. They thanked the Marine and followed his directions, a renewed sense of pride swelling in their chests. Their father was the CO, the commanding officer. A big deal. The main gate was a far more elaborate affair. A complex of inspection lanes, guard booths, and retractable steel barricades that looked capable of stopping a tank. The flow of traffic was slow, methodical. They waited their turn, the sun glinting off the windshield, the sense of occasion making their hearts beat a little faster. Finally, their car rolled to a stop in front of a booth occupied by a man whose posture seemed designed to broadcast his own importance. He wore the stripes of a security forces sergeant, and his name tag read Miller. Unlike the young Marine, Sergeant Miller wore no smile. His face was a mask of bored contempt, his eyes scanning their vehicle as if it were a piece of garbage that had mistakenly drifted into his pristine lane. Sergeant Miller leaned out of his booth, his movements slow and deliberately unimpressed. He didn't speak, just held out a hand, palm up, a silent, impatient demand for documents. Caleb passed his driver's license and the printed invitation through the window. Miller took them with 2 fingers, as if touching them might be contaminating. His eyes, small and hard, flicked from the license to Caleb's face, then to Josh, then to Noah in the rearview mirror. A slight, almost imperceptible sneer tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Triplets," he stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. Cute. The word was laced with a kind of dismissive poison that immediately put all three brothers on edge. The professional respect they had experienced at the South Gate evaporated, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable tension. "We're here for Captain David Harris's commendation ceremony," Caleb said, keeping his voice steady and polite, just as his father had always taught him. "We were told our passes would be here at this gate." Miller made a show of looking at the invitation, holding it far from his face as if the print were offensive. He then tapped a few keys on his computer terminal with a single, stabbing finger, his gaze fixed on the screen with theatrical intensity. "Harris! Harris! Harris!" he muttered, drawing the name out, making it sound common and insignificant. "Yeah, I see a flag here. Captain David Harris." For an event at the officers' club. He looked up from his screen, but not at them. His gaze was fixed somewhere over their car, as if they were too unimportant to merit direct eye contact. "And you three are supposed to be his sons?" The question was loaded with disbelief. Josh, the observer, noted the way Miller's jaw was set, the slight flare of his nostrils. This wasn't a security check. It was a performance. Miller was playing a role he'd created for himself. The unbreachable guardian, the man who held the keys to the kingdom and enjoyed watching people beg for them. "Yes, we are," Caleb said, a note of firmness creeping into his tone. "Caleb, Josh, and Noah Harris." Miller finally looked at him, a condescending smirk fully formed now. "A lot of people try to name-drop their way onto this base, kids. You'd be surprised. We get all kinds. People think throwing a high-ranking name around is a magic password." He leaned in closer to the window, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet mocking, whisper. "But I'm the guy who knows all the tricks. I'm the one who separates the wheat from the chaff. You understand what chaff is, right?" In the back seat, Noah's hand clenched into a fist on his thigh. He could feel the heat rising in his neck. This man wasn't just doing his job. He was enjoying their discomfort, trying to humiliate them. He felt Caleb's eyes flick to the rearview mirror, a silent warning to stay calm. Caleb took a slow breath. "Sergeant, we're not name-dropping. We are his sons. We are on the access list. Could you please just check it again?" Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the air. "I checked it, and I see your names. But I also see a problem." He straightened up, puffing his chest out slightly. "There's a discrepancy with the vehicle authorization. Your car isn't cleared." A lie. A blatant, easily verifiable lie. But in that moment, at that gate, his word was law. The brothers exchanged a look of bewildered frustration. They had followed the instructions perfectly. Their father, a man for whom precision and planning were second nature, would never have made such a mistake. This was manufactured. This was a power trip. The line of cars behind them was growing, the muted sounds of impatient engines a backdrop to their escalating predicament. Sergeant Miller seemed to draw energy from it, his sense of control swelling with every passing second. He was the director of this little drama, and he was determined to drag it out. The supposed discrepancy was the hook Sergeant Miller needed, and he sank it in deep. "A vehicle discrepancy is a serious issue," he announced, his voice taking on a tone of grave, official importance that was utterly false. "It suggests a breakdown in protocol. It suggests that someone, somewhere, didn't do their job." Or, he paused, letting the implication hang in the air, "it suggests that the individuals in the vehicle are not who they say they are." Caleb felt a surge of indignation. "That's ridiculous. This is the car my father listed on the access request. A silver Honda Accord. The license plate is right there. You can check it." He pointed to the paperwork on Miller's clipboard, which they could see even from the car. Miller didn't even glance at it. "I don't need to check it, son. The system tells me what I need to know. And my system is telling me there's a problem." He was a broken record of obstruction, a bureaucratic wall with a smirk. Josh leaned forward from the passenger seat, his voice calm and analytical. "Sergeant, with all due respect, computer systems can have glitches. Is there a manual log you can verify? Or perhaps you could make a quick call to the event coordinator at the officers' club. Her name is Lieutenant Commander Evans. She's on the invitation." Josh pointed again at the cardstock Miller was still holding. Miller shot him a withering glare, offended by the suggestion that his authority or his system could be flawed. Are you trying to tell me how to do my job, kid? I've been manning this post since before you were shaving. I know the protocols. I'm the protocol. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was no longer just a guard. In his own mind, he was the living embodiment of the base's security. In the back, Noah's patience had frayed to a single, trembling thread. He muttered just loud enough for his brothers to hear, "This guy's a clown." Caleb shot another look in the mirror, this one sharper. "Don't give him the excuse he's looking for," the look said. The line of cars behind them was now a significant presence. A horn honked in the distance, a short, impatient blast. Miller's head snapped in that direction, a flicker of irritation on his face before it settled back into a mask of smug control. He seemed to relish the audience. He was making an example of these three young men who had dared to assume entry. "All right," Miller said, his voice ringing with false authority. "Because of this security flag, I'm going to have to ask you to pull your vehicle over to the secondary inspection area." He pointed a thick finger toward a sterile, isolated lane cordoned off with orange cones. It was a place for suspicious vehicles, for cars to be torn apart by search teams. It was a place of shame, and "I'm going to need you all to step out of the vehicle." This was a clear escalation, a move designed to intimidate and humiliate. They weren't just visitors with a paperwork problem anymore. They were being treated like potential threats. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Arguing would be pointless. It would only feed the sergeant's ego. He put the car in drive and steered it slowly into the designated area, the crunch of the tires on the gravel sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. As they got out of the car, the sun felt hotter, the air heavier. They stood beside their vehicle, three identical figures feeling increasingly small and powerless under the scrutinizing gaze of a man who was drunk on a thimbleful of authority. Miller sauntered over, his boots kicking up dust. He didn't have his clipboard or his computer anymore. This was personal. "All right, let's try this again," he said, circling them like a predator. "One at a time. What's your name? And who is your father?" He was trying to separate them, to break their united front, to find a crack in their story that he himself had invented. The secondary inspection area was a desolate patch of asphalt and gravel, baking under the relentless California sun. It was deliberately set apart, a stage for anyone arousing a guard's suspicion, and Sergeant Miller was determined to make full use of it. He ordered them to stand a few feet apart, a classic interrogation tactic designed to prevent them from communicating or drawing support from one another. "You," he barked, pointing at Caleb. "Let's start with you. Full name: Caleb Michael Harris. And your father?" "Captain David Harris." "His rank is captain?" Miller asked, a note of feigned surprise in his voice. "That's a pretty high rank for a man whose kids show up in a beat-up old Honda with faulty paperwork." The insult to their car, a vehicle their father had given them and which they cherished, was a low blow. Caleb's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "The car is fine, and the paperwork should be too." Miller ignored him and turned to Josh. "You. Name?" "Joshua Robert Harris." "And what's this ceremony for? What did your daddy do to deserve a party?" The use of the word daddy was a deliberate, emasculating jab, meant to belittle both them and their father. Josh, ever the calm one, met Miller's gaze without flinching. "It's a commendation for command leadership during Operation Serpent's Coil," he said, his voice clear and precise. "It's not a party. It's an official military function." Josh's accurate, specific answer seemed to annoy Miller more than anything. He had expected fumbling or uncertainty. Instead, he got crisp, factual information that contradicted the narrative he was trying to build. He pivoted to Noah, who was visibly struggling to keep his temper in check. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his knuckles white. "And you? The angry one. What's your name?" "Noah James Harris," Noah said, his voice low and tight. "And you better stop calling our father Daddy." Miller's eyes lit up. He had found the reaction he was looking for. He took a step closer to Noah, invading his personal space, his face contorting into a mask of theatrical authority. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, kid? You're on a federal military installation. Right now, I'm the highest authority you need to worry about. A flick of my wrist, and I can have you all in cuffs for threatening a federal officer and attempting to gain illegal access to a secure facility. Do you have any idea how much trouble you'd be in?" The threat was absurd, a gross overreach of his power, but the menace behind it was real. Caleb stepped forward slightly. "Sergeant, no one is threatening you. My brother is just upset, and frankly, so are we. We've been nothing but cooperative. We're on the access list. Our father is expecting us. The ceremony is scheduled to begin in less than an hour. We're going to be late." Miller turned on Caleb, his face inches away. "You'll be late if I say you'll be late. You'll get on this base if I say you'll get on this base. Right now, I'm not convinced. The story feels thin. 3 kids who look exactly the same, showing up out of the blue, claiming to be the sons of a high-ranking SEAL commander. It sounds like a prank, or worse." He let that last phrase hang in the air, a vague and sinister implication. He was no longer just a bully. He was an accuser, painting them as potential criminals. The weight of the injustice was crushing. They were trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare, where the truth was irrelevant and the only thing that mattered was the whim of one man. The sun beat down, the minutes ticked by, and the hope that had filled their morning was curdling into a mixture of despair and rage. The situation had devolved into a miserable stalemate. Sergeant Miller had exhausted his flimsy questioning and now seemed content to simply let them wait, a form of passive-aggressive punishment. He stood by his guard booth, arms crossed, occasionally glancing over at them with a look of profound satisfaction. He had made his point. He had demonstrated his power. The triplets stood by their car, a silent, frustrated trio. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a slow-burning anger and a growing sense of panic. The ceremony, their father, a man who rarely showed his pride, had explicitly told them how much it meant to him that they would be there. He would be on a stage, surrounded by his peers, men who had faced death alongside him, and his sons, his legacy, would be absent, held up at the gate by a petty tyrant. It was an unbearable thought. They had been there for nearly an hour. The line of cars at the main gate had ebbed and flowed, dozens of people gaining entry while they were marooned in the inspection lane. Caleb finally looked at his watch, his face grim. "The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. He's going to make us miss it." Noah kicked at a loose piece of gravel, the sound sharp and angry. "This is insane. We can't just stand here. There has to be something we can do." Josh, who had been quietly observing their captor, spoke up. "He's enjoying this too much. Arguing with him is pointless. He feeds on it. Reason doesn't work. We need a different approach." It was Caleb who came to the conclusion, his expression hardening with resolve. He had been polite. He had been patient. He had followed every rule and respected the uniform, even when the man wearing it deserved no respect. But his father was being dishonored by this man's actions, and that was a line that could not be crossed. "All right," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. "I want to play games." "Fine." He looked Sergeant Miller dead in the eye from across the asphalt. "Sergeant, we have been here for an hour. You have our IDs. You know we are on the list. We've answered all your questions. Either you let us on this base right now, or you need to get your commanding officer down here." The direct challenge, the escalation up the chain of command, was a gamble. Miller's face darkened. He stalked back over to them, his boots crunching on the gravel with angry emphasis. "You don't get to make demands here. I'm in charge of this gate. No one goes over my head." He leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "I think you're lying. I think the whole story is a sham. So here's my final offer. You 3 get back in your car, turn it around, and get off government property. You have 5 minutes. If that car is still here in 5 minutes, I'm calling the military police and having you all processed for trespassing. Your choice." It was the peak of his hubris, the ultimate power play. He had pushed them into a corner with no way out. Or so he thought. A strange calm settled over Caleb. The desperation vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. There was one option left, one A-bomb in their arsenal they had been reluctant to use, because their father had taught them never to use his position for personal gain. But this wasn't for personal gain. This was to honor him. "Okay," Caleb said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Miller let out a derisive snort. Who are you calling? Your mommy? She can't help you. Caleb ignored him. His fingers moved with practiced speed across the screen, selecting a contact simply labeled Dad. As he lifted the phone to his ear, he looked directly at Sergeant Miller, his eyes holding a new kind of fire. No, Caleb said, his voice steady and clear. I'm calling him. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. Sergeant Miller, who had been the undisputed king of this tiny fiefdom, was suddenly faced with an unexpected move. He watched Caleb with a mixture of amusement and contempt, convinced it was a bluff. Go ahead, he sneered, gesturing expansively with his hand. Call your daddy. Tell him the big, bad sergeant at the gate won't let you in. I'm sure he'll drop everything and come running. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Caleb held the phone to his ear, his gaze locked with Miller's. The phone rang once, twice. The sound seemed to echo in the space between them. On the third ring, it connected. The audience of this drama, Josh, Noah, and the smug sergeant, could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was more than enough. Dad! Caleb's voice was tight, all trace of youthful excitement gone, replaced by the weary tone of a soldier reporting from a field. It's Caleb. I'm sorry to bother you right before the ceremony, but we have a problem. He paused, listening. The sounds of the base, a distant helicopter, the hum of traffic, seemed to fade into the background. We're the main gate. They won't let us in. Another pause. Caleb's eyes flickered over to Miller, who was still smirking, enjoying the show. The guard's name is Sergeant Miller. He says there's a discrepancy with the car. We've been here for over an hour. He just told us we have 5 minutes to leave the premises, or he's going to have us arrested for trespassing. The words came out in a calm, factual torrent. He wasn't complaining. He was reporting. He was giving his commanding officer a situation report. There was a long silence on Caleb's end of the line. He just listened. Josh and Noah watched their brother's face, trying to read the silent conversation. They saw a flicker of frustration, then surprise, then a slow dawning understanding. A subtle shift occurred in Caleb's posture. He straightened up, his shoulders squaring. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. It was the same look they sometimes saw in their father's eyes, a look of absolute, unshakable purpose. He listened for another 10 seconds, nodding slightly. Yes, sir, he said, the honorific sounding completely natural. Okay, we will. We won't move an inch. Understood. Another brief pause. Okay, love you too, Dad. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. Caleb turned his head slowly, first to his brothers, giving them a look that said, "It's handled. Trust me." Then, he turned his full attention back to Sergeant Miller, who was looking at him with an impatient, mocking expression. Well, is the cavalry on its way? Miller taunted. Caleb's expression was unreadable. His voice, when he spoke, was devoid of emotion. It was flat, declarative, and carried a strange weight. My father asked me to give you a message. He took a small step forward. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "Stay exactly where you are. Do not move." The words hung in the hot, still air. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was an order delivered through a proxy. It was so unexpected, so bold, that it momentarily short-circuited Sergeant Miller's brain. He was the one who gave orders here. He was the one in control. This was a complete inversion of the dynamic he had so carefully constructed. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and, for the first time, a hint of genuine uncertainty. Sergeant Miller stared at Caleb, a battle of emotions playing out across his face. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a surge of renewed anger at the sheer audacity of the message. "Is that a threat?" he snarled, trying to regain his footing, to re-establish the dominance that was rapidly slipping through his fingers. "Are you threatening me, kid? Because I'm about 2 seconds away from..." He trailed off because Caleb wasn't reacting. None of them were. The three brothers simply stood there, resolute and silent, a united front of unnerving calm. They had their orders. Do not move an inch. This sudden, quiet defiance was more unsettling to Miller than any shouting match would have been. He was a bully who fed on fear and frustration, and they were giving him nothing. His own bluster seemed to echo back at him, hollow and impotent. He looked from Caleb to Josh to Noah. Three identical, impassive faces staring back at him. It was like confronting a statue. His bravado began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing unease. Who was their father, really? A captain? Yes, but captains came in many forms. Most were administrators, paper pushers. But what if this one was different? The junior guard who had been directing traffic in the adjacent lane, a young airman named Davis, had been watching the entire exchange with growing discomfort. He now looked over at Miller, his expression a mixture of fear and curiosity. The atmosphere at the gate had shifted from tense to something else entirely, something heavy and foreboding, like the air before a lightning strike. Time stretched. A minute passed, feeling like 10. Miller tried to act busy, shuffling papers on his podium that he wasn't actually reading. He kept shooting furtive glances at the triplets, then up the road, leading onto the base, as if expecting to see a base security patrol car arriving to vindicate him. He needed to be right. His entire sense of self, built on this small pedestal of authority, depended on it. Then, a new sound began to permeate the air. It was faint at first, a low, guttural rumble that was distinct from the civilian traffic. It wasn't the whine of a police siren or the drone of a standard military truck. It was deeper, more aggressive. Airman Davis heard it too, his head tilting in its direction. Miller tried to ignore it, but the sound grew steadily louder, closer. It was the sound of heavy, powerful engines moving at speed. It was the sound of something coming for them. The triplets didn't react. They just stood there, waiting. They knew what was coming. The sound resolved itself into two distinct sources. Cresting a small hill on the base's main road were two vehicles, and they were not standard issue. They were black, heavily armored, and menacing. They looked like something straight out of a war zone. They were MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush protective vehicles, and they were moving with a purpose that was terrifying to behold. They weren't staying in the proper lanes. They swerved around a slow-moving delivery truck, their massive tires eating up the asphalt. They were not heading for the visitor center or the barracks. They were heading directly for the main gate, directly for the secondary inspection area, directly for them. Sergeant Miller's jaw went slack. All the color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. This was not the base security patrol. This was not his backup. This was something else entirely. This was a response so disproportionate to a simple gate dispute that it defied all logic. The fear that had been a small, gnawing worm in his gut suddenly blossomed into a cold, paralyzing dread. The calm, steady words of the boy echoed in his mind. Stay exactly where you are. Do not move. It hadn't been a threat. It had been a warning. The two black MRAPs didn't slow down as they approached the gate complex. They maintained their speed until the last possible second, a calculated display of intimidation and control. With a deafening squeal of air brakes and the hiss of hydraulics, they came to a hard stop, their immense weight shifting forward. One pulled up directly in front of the triplets' Honda, its massive black grille looming like the maw of some prehistoric beast. The other maneuvered with terrifying precision, flanking Sergeant Miller's guard booth, effectively cutting off any possibility of retreat. The entire gate, moments before a scene of mundane traffic, was now a frozen tableau of shock and awe. The civilian drivers waiting in line stared, their windows rolled up, their expressions a mixture of fear and utter bewilderment. Before the dust even had a chance to settle, the doors of the MRAPs burst open. 8 figures emerged, not with the plodding gait of ordinary soldiers, but with the fluid, silent efficiency of apex predators. They were clad in full combat gear, multicam uniforms, body armor, helmets with integrated comms, and rifles held in a low-ready position. They were Navy SEALs. They moved as a single organism, each man knowing his role without a word being spoken. 4 of them immediately established a perimeter, their eyes scanning the surroundings, their presence instantly transforming the public space into a secured military objective. The other 4, led by a man whose face was a granite mask of hardened experience, strode directly toward the heart of the confrontation. This was Chief Petty Officer Thorne. He was not a large man, but he moved with an aura of compressed power and absolute authority that made him seem to tower over everyone else. His eyes, cold and sharp, ignored the triplets completely. They swept over the scene, taking in the Honda, the inspection lane, and finally locking onto the pale, trembling form of Sergeant Miller. Miller was frozen behind his podium, his hands gripping the edges as if it were the only thing holding him upright. The sneer, the arrogance, the condescending bluster, it had all been sandblasted away, leaving only raw, naked fear. He looked like a man who had been casually tormenting a stray cat, only to have a pack of wolves descend upon him. Chief Thorne stopped a few feet from Miller. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The lethal calm in his tone was more terrifying than any shout. "Sergeant Miller," he said. The name was not a question. It was a judgment. Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Chief, I was just following security protocols." His voice was a thin, reedy whisper, a pathetic shadow of its former booming arrogance. The chief took one more step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Your protocols," he said, his voice dropping even lower, each word a perfectly polished stone of contempt, "have resulted in you detaining the sons of the commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 1. You were given a lawful, pre-authorized directive to grant them access for his commendation ceremony, an event which, thanks to you, has now been delayed." He let the weight of that sink in. Miller hadn't just inconvenienced some kids. He had disrupted an official function for one of the most respected and feared commanders on the West Coast. He had thrown a rock at a hornet's nest, and the entire swarm had come out. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. Miller's perceived authority was revealed for what it was, a fragile illusion, shattered by the arrival of the real thing. Chief Thorne let the silence hang for a moment, a tool he wielded with the same precision as his rifle. He allowed Sergeant Miller to stew in the cold dread of his own making. The other SEALs remained positioned, silent sentinels whose very presence amplified the gravity of the situation. They were a living, breathing testament to the colossal mistake Miller had made. Finally, Thorne spoke again, his voice still deceptively calm. "I have a direct question for you, Sergeant. Did you, at any point, verify the vehicle information against the approved access list provided by the captain's office?" Miller's eyes darted around, looking for an escape that didn't exist. The system, it flagged a discrepancy. He stammered, clinging to the lie that had started this whole mess. Thorne's expression didn't change, but a new, harder edge entered his voice. "There was no discrepancy. I personally verified the access request this morning. A silver Honda Accord, license plate 7 Kilo Bravo 921. The exact vehicle parked right there." He gestured with his chin toward the triplets' car, without even looking at it. "I'll ask you again. Did you lie about a security flag to harass the sons of a commanding officer?" The question was a trap, and Miller had stumbled right into it. To admit it was to confess to a flagrant abuse of power. To deny it was to call a chief petty officer of the SEALs a liar. Miller's face, already pale, took on a greenish tint. "No, I must have misread it. It was a mistake." Thorne tilted his head slightly, a gesture of mock consideration. "A mistake. You mistake 3 young men for liars. You mistake your duty to facilitate access for an opportunity to bully and intimidate. You mistake your authority at this gate for absolute power. That's a lot of mistakes, Sergeant. In our line of work, a mistake like that can get people killed. In your line of work, it gets you a one-on-one with a base commander." He then turned his head slightly toward the younger guard, who was standing by his own lane, looking like he wished the earth would swallow him whole. "Airman Davis." The young airman snapped to attention, his eyes wide. "Yes, Chief. You witnessed this entire interaction. Provide a statement. What did you observe?" Airman Davis hesitated for only a second, glancing at the now pathetic figure of his superior. He chose the truth. "Chief, the visitors were polite," he said, his voice clear and steady. They provided their identification and their reason for being here. Sergeant Miller accused them of name-dropping, ordered them to secondary inspection, and threatened to have them arrested when they followed his instructions to call their father. Sir, it was a damning, concise summary. A nail in Miller's coffin. Thorne nodded slowly, his gaze returning to Miller. Thank you, Airman. He looked at Miller, his eyes completely devoid of any emotion save for a cold, professional finality. Sergeant Miller, surrender your sidearm and your duty belt. Place them on the podium. You are relieved of your post, effective immediately. The base commander's office will be expecting you at 1,400 hours. I strongly advise you not to be late. Miller stared at him, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The order was absolute. His career, or at least this comfortable post where he could lord over civilians, was over. With trembling hands, he unbuckled his duty belt and placed it on the podium with a heavy clatter. Two of the SEALs stepped forward, their movements economical and decisive. They flanked Miller, their presence leaving no room for argument, and escorted the defeated, humiliated sergeant away from the gate, his reign of tyranny officially and spectacularly concluded. With Sergeant Miller gone, the suffocating tension that had gripped the gate for over an hour finally broke. It was like a fever dream ending. The two SEALs marched the disgraced sergeant toward a waiting security vehicle, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The remaining members of the tactical team relaxed their posture slightly, the immediate threat neutralized. The world began to move again. Chief Petty Officer Thorne stood for a moment, watching Miller's departure, ensuring the transfer of custody was complete. Then, he turned to face the triplets. The transformation in his demeanor was instantaneous and startling. The hard, intimidating warrior vanished, replaced by a man with a warm, almost apologetic look in his eyes. The granite mask softened, and the corners of his mouth turned up in a slight, genuine smile. Caleb, Josh, Noah, he said, his voice now carrying a respectful, friendly tone. He knew their names. Of course he did. I'm Chief Thorne. On behalf of your father, I want to apologize for this delay. This is not how we welcome family to Coronado. He walked over to them, his boots making a soft crunch on the gravel. He looked each of them in the eye. Your father is immensely proud of you. The way you handled yourselves just now. With patience, with restraint, that's a different kind of strength. It's the kind that matters most. The praise from a man like this, a man who had likely seen the worst and best of humanity, landed with profound impact. The anger and frustration the brothers had been feeling began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of relief and validation. Caleb found his voice first. Thank you, Chief. We were just trying to get to this ceremony. I know, Thorne said with a nod, and we're going to get you there. He won't start without you. He gestured toward the hulking black MRAP that was still parked in front of their Honda. We had a bit of a welcome plan for you boys, but we had to adjust the itinerary. Consider this the express lane. He grinned. Don't worry about your car. One of my guys will drive it over to the officers' club and have it waiting for you. Your visitor passes are right here. He produced 3 laminated badges from a pocket in his vest and handed them to Caleb. Let's go. We're burning daylight. Still in a state of mild shock, the 3 brothers followed Chief Thorne to the massive vehicle. One of the SEALs opened the heavy rear door, revealing a surprisingly spacious and technologically advanced interior. As they climbed inside, the world of civilian life felt a million miles away. The door sealed behind them with a solid, reassuring thud, cocooning them in a world of quiet, air-conditioned efficiency. As the MRAP began to roll forward, smoothly accelerating past the gate and onto the base proper, they looked out the thick ballistic glass window. They were finally inside. As they drove through the orderly streets of the base, lined with palm trees and impeccably maintained buildings, they saw him. Standing on the steps of the stately officers' club, in his immaculate dress, white uniform adorned with rows of ribbons, was their father. Captain David Harris wasn't looking at the building or the other officers milling about. His gaze was fixed on the approaching MRAP, and on his face was an expression of profound relief, deep apology, and an overwhelming, undeniable love. The narrator's voice comes in, full of warmth and reflection. The story of what happened at the gate wasn't just about a powerful man pulling strings to solve a problem. It was about a system, a brotherhood, correcting an injustice. It was a stark lesson in the nature of true authority. Sergeant Miller's power was loud, arrogant, and built on a foundation of intimidation. It was a hollow shell. Captain Harris's authority was quiet, unseen, and commanded a loyalty so profound that a team of the world's most elite warriors would drop everything to rectify an insult to his family. The triplets learned something vital that day, something that would shape the men they were to become. They learned that honor isn't about the rank on your collar or the authority you're given. It's about the character you possess. It's about humility in the face of power and strength in the face of adversity. And as they stepped out of that armored vehicle and into their father's embrace, they weren't just the sons of a hero anymore. They were young men who had faced their own battle at the gates and had emerged, with their integrity intact, into the proud, welcoming light of their father's world.